Imagine you are standing in a 1980s vocational workshop in Lahore.
Oh, I can picture it perfectly.
Right. The air just smells heavily of like machine oil, metallic dust, and just this intense
Yeah,
focus.
that distinct metal shop smell.
Exactly. And in your hand, you are holding a flat, floppy, completely unimpressive piece of sheet iron.
Basically a piece of scrap.
Yeah, just scrap. But today, you aren't allowed to leave this room until that useless piece of scrap is transformed into a highly precise tool capable of withstanding boiling cooking oil.
Man, it really is the ultimate test of human intent over raw material, isn't it?
It totally is.
Because, I mean, we are so used to the modern manufacturing black box,
Yeah.
where you just feed raw materials into some massive machine.
Oh, right. You push a button.
Exactly. The machine whirs, and perfectly formed objects just pop out. We never actually see the transformation.
No, we don't.
We never have to understand the sheer physical struggle required to, well, to bend the physical world to our will.
And that physical struggle is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are picking apart a fascinating, really vintage-feeling educational textbook. It translates to metalworking, and it was published by the Punjab Textbook Board.
Yeah, back in the day.
Right. And its entire mission is to teach this lost, highly tactile, analog art of metalcraft.
What's really fascinating here is that this text, it doesn't just act like a manual. It operates as a literal masterclass in geometry, patience, and applied physics.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't just hand you a hammer and say, go to town. It systematically breaks down how a human being can force a rigid, completely unforgiving medium into complex, three-dimensional shapes.
Yeah, it's intense.
It really invites you to see the mundane metal objects scattered around your own house entirely through the eyes of an artisan.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the journey from that flat sheet of metal to a 3D object, it doesn't start with bending anything, right?
No, not at all.
Before any student in this curriculum is even allowed to pick up a tool or, strike a single blow, they have to master their environment.
The rules.
Yes, the textbook lays down these foundational, totally uncompromising rules of the workshop.
The barrier to entry is just strict, non-negotiable safety protocol. Before you manipulate the metal, you have to secure yourself.
And it goes deep into personal safety. I mean, the text mandates proper fitted clothing, specifically a heavy apron.
Which is crucial.
Right. And you are required to roll your sleeves up tightly above the elbows. And oh, I found this rule incredibly vivid. You are strictly instructed to strip off all rings and watches before you even step up to a bench.
I can actually see you wincing at the thought of it.
I am. I mean, I'm just picturing a loose ring catching on, like a rotating lathe, or getting pinched under a massive sheet of heavy iron.
Oh yeah, it's bad.
It's not just a generic safety bullet point. That is fundamental injury prevention. One snag, and the machinery wins every single time.
The machinery always wins.
Yeah.
Period. And that's exactly why the text also focuses so heavily on tool safety.
Right, like with the files.
Yes.
Yeah.
For instance, it explicitly forbids ever using a metal file that doesn't have a wooden handle firmly attached to the end.
Because the back end of a file, the thin end is essentially a sharp metal spike, right?
Exactly. It's a spike. So if that file catches on your work and you're pushing with your full body weight,
Oh, man.
that spike goes straight into your palm.
Just a horrifying, but I guess very real workshop injury.
Very real. The book also mandates never putting sharp tools in your pockets. And you have to maintain your tools by cleaning them constantly with a specialized wire brush.
The file card.
Right, the file card.
Yeah.
And then it zooms out to the macro environment. The floors must be kept meticulously free of oil and grease.
To prevent slipping while carrying heavy stock, I imagine.
Exactly. Ladders have to be completely secure, and you must have a really deep understanding of electrical grounding in the shop.
I look at all these rules, and it totally reminds me of a high-end culinary kitchen.
Oh, like the prep work.
Yeah, the concept of mise en place. Having your cutting board, your knives, and your ingredients in their precise state and place before the cooking even begins.
That's a great comparison.
Right. If your station isn't neutralized and prepped, chaos ensues the second the heat gets turned up.
Well, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, these rules are serving a really profound psychological function, too.
How so?
Think about the medium of iron or steel. Metal is incredibly unforgiving. I mean, if you make a cut too deep in a piece of wood, you can sometimes sand it down, right?
Right. Or disguise it with wood filler.
Exactly. But metal doesn't let you hide anything. It has a physical memory of every single strike, every dent, and every misstep.
So you are effectively creating a hyper-controlled, sterile environment.
Precisely. You are neutralizing the room. The ultimate goal of the artisan is that the only thing being deformed, bent, or stressed in that entire shop is the metal itself.
Wow.
Not the tools, not the floor, and certainly not the human body.
Okay, so you've created the sterile environment, you've neutralized the room, but how do you actually enforce your will on cold, rigid iron?
Well, your bare hands can't do it.
Right. You need a proxy. Which brings us to the tools, these literal extensions of the human hand.
And the textbook offers a massive, highly specialized arsenal for this. Let's start by looking at the taxonomy of impact, the hammers.
Yeah, and it's definitely not just like grabbing whatever is in your toolbox to smash something.
Not at all.
The book lists the ball peen hammer, which has that rounded back specifically used for riveting, which is essentially mashing the head of a metal pin into a mushroom shape to lock two pieces together, right?
That's spot on.
Then you have the straight peen for flattening and stretching metal, and the cross peen, which is shaped sort of like a wedge and used to start a crease for folding.
But crucially, and this is a big deal in the text, they make a massive point about using a wooden mallet.
Right, I saw that. Why would...
You absolutely must use a wooden mallet on thin, soft metal sheets. Because if you take a hardened steel hammer to a piece of thin sheet metal, you aren't just bending it.
You're doing something else to it.
You are stretching the actual molecular structure of the metal at the exact point of impact. You scar it, you thin it out, and you change its surface profile forever.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, so the wooden mallet applies massive kinetic force, but it disperses that energy without marring the surface.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, then the curriculum moves from impact to abrasion. The files.
A surgical kit.
Seriously, it looks like a surgical kit. You have flat, square, round, half round, and triangular files, and they break them down into single cut teeth versus double cut teeth.
Yeah, it gets really specific.
They detail the physical motions too, like draw filing, where you pull the file sideways across the metal to shave it down perfectly flat, versus cross filing.
It is an incredible amount of categorization for an action that most people assume just means rubbing two pieces of metal together until one gets smaller.
Hey, wait, hold on. I have to ask this on behalf of anyone listening, because I'm looking at this list and thinking about the final project.
Okay, what's the question?
We are making basic household items here, like kitchen tongs.
Right.
Why on earth do I need 5 different file shapes, single and double cuts, and specialized angles just to smooth a corner? Isn't this massive overkill for making basic household items?
It's a fantastic question, really. And it brings up one of the hidden physical realities of metalworking that most of us just never think about.
Which is?
It is all about surface tension and stress points. So imagine you are cutting a sharp inside curve into a piece of sheet metal.
Okay, like the inner curve of a wrench or maybe a hook?
Yes. Now, if you use the wrong tool, say you try to use a square file to smooth out that inside curve,
Yeah.
you might actually think you've done a really good job.
Because it looks fine.
Right. It might look relatively smooth to the naked eye, but on a microscopic level, you have left tiny, jagged V-notches and sharp interior corners deep inside the metal's edge.
Okay, so it's microscopically ugly. Why does that matter for a pair of kitchen tongs?
Because of how physical force travels through solid objects. When that metal object is put under pressure during everyday use, like when you squeeze the tongs or put a heavy coat on that hook, all of the physical stress from that bending action travels through the metal.
Okay, I'm following.
And it concentrates directly at those microscopic jagged points.
Mm.
Engineers actually call it a stress riser.
A stress riser.
Yeah, because all the force pinpoints on that one tiny flaw, the metal will eventually tear, shear, or crack. And that crack will originate exactly from your bad filing job.
Wow. Okay, so using a half-round file on an inside curve isn't just about making it look pretty.
No, not at all.
It actually removes the stress risers. The tools are highly specialized because they have to manipulate the object without compromising its structural integrity.
Exactly.
You are literally managing stress on a microscopic level, so the tool doesn't just destroy itself a few years later.
You are engineering its lifespan through abrasion. And, you can't engineer anything without a map. which is why the text dedicates so much space to measuring tools.
Right. The measuring tools, the compasses, the spring dividers, the inside and outside calipers.
All crucial.
They even highlight the odd leg caliper, which is sometimes called a Jenny caliper, I think.
Yeah, the Jenny caliper.
One leg has a sharp point, and the other leg curves around the edge of your metal sheet. It basically allows you to drag a perfectly parallel scratch line down the entire length of the metal.
You are using these tools to physically score your intentions into the steel before you ever make a single cut.
Okay, so we have our mise en place. We understand the microscopic stakes of our files. We have our maps scored directly into the iron.
We are ready.
Now we have to make the leap. This is where we go from a flat 2D plane to a 3D object. It's basically the origami of metal.
The transition of state. And this requires an entirely different set of physical forces.
Starting with cutting. The book outlines a whole family of snips.
Oh, the snips.
Straight snips for your long cuts. Bent snips. And the hawksbill snips, which are shaped to act almost like a scalpel, allowing you to cut those tight inside curves we just talked about without bending the surrounding metal.
But the real aha moment comes when they apply these tools to the first major project in the curriculum, the chimta, or the tongs.
Right, an absolute staple in any South Asian kitchen. They use it for flipping roti over an open flame.
Exactly. So you start with a flat 20-gauge sheet of iron. You use your snips to cut it to exactly 600 millimeters by 30 millimeter.
And at this point, it's just a floppy, long rectangle of metal, right?
It's floppy.
Like if you held it by one end, it would just droop toward the floor.
Right. It has no structure yet. But the text details a specific physical manipulation to fix that, called wiring an edge.
Okay, let's break down what that actually means in practice.
Sure.
You take a piece of thick steel wire, lay it along the long edge of your floppy sheet metal, and use your hammer to slowly fold the sheet metal up, over, and entirely around the wire.
You're trapping it.
Trapping it inside a metal cylinder down the entire length of the handle.
And structurally, what is that actually accomplishing?
Well, visually, I was thinking about it like a hem in a piece of clothing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like when you sew a garment,
Yeah.
you fold over and hem the raw edge so the fabric doesn't fray and fall apart in the wash. It just gives it a clean, finished border.
A clothing hem is a brilliant way to think about it visually. I mean, it does give the metal a safe, smooth edge so you don't cut your hand.
But there's more to it.
Structurally.
Right? Yeah.
You aren't just preventing fraying, you are fundamentally altering the physics of the object.
Because it's not fabric, it's iron.
Right. That 20-gauge sheet on its own is weak. Like you said, you could bend it in half with 2 fingers. But the moment you fold it into a cylinder along its edge, even a tiny cylinder trapping a wire, it gains massive load-bearing
It
properties.
suddenly becomes rigid.
Exactly. When you squeeze the tongs, they spring back. You haven't added thick slabs of new, heavy material. You've merely manipulated its geometry. And geometry dictates strength.
You are turning origami into architecture. It's so elegant.
It really is.
And we see the exact same principle of geometric strength in the next project from the text too, which is the shoehorn.
Ah, the shoehorn. It's a beautiful exercise in manipulating curves to defeat gravity.
For the shoehorn, the text bumps us up to a thicker 16-gauge iron. You map it out, cut it, and file it perfectly smooth so there are no microscopic stress risers to cause a tear, like we talked about earlier.
Right, keeping it strong.
But a flat piece of 16-gauge iron will still buckle if you shove your entire body weight against it while putting on a tight shoe.
It definitely will.
So to give it strength, it must be swaged or dished.
And the trick here is you don't hit this flat on an anvil. You actually place the flat metal over a hollow block, a void.
And you use a specific rounded hammer to pound a deep concave curve into the metal, stretching it down into that void.
Exactly.
You are creating that perfect heel-hugging ergonomic curve. But just like the wired edge on the tongs, pounding that concave curve into a flat plane instantly creates rigidity.
The shape is what gives it power.
A swaged piece of iron will hold the weight of a human being. The artisan is using the hammer to literally engineer structural integrity out of thin air.
It is brilliant. You are, in a sense, weaponizing geometry.
Which sets us up perfectly for the climax of the
A
curriculum.
big one.
Yeah, because if the tongs are about folding and the shoehorn is about swaging, the final project is the absolute boss level of basic metalworking.
It really pulls everything together.
It combines precise geometry, intense perforation, and thermal joining all in one object.
A frying steamer.
Yes. A flat, wide, perforated metal spoon used to fish hot food out of boiling oil. And looking at the textbook's instructions for this, honestly, my mind was blown by the methodical intensity required here.
Not a simple project.
No, you have to take your compass and draw perfectly concentric circles on the metal plate. Then you use your dividers to segment those circles into evenly spaced intersecting lines.
Setting up a grid.
Exactly. Finally, you take a solid metal punch, place it over an anvil, and physically drive it through the steel to cut out dozens of perfect little strainer holes at those exact intersections.
It is an incredibly demanding task for a student's hands and eyes.
But here is where it gets really interesting to me. I'm looking at this grid of holes and thinking, how on earth is a student in an analog workshop supposed to keep perfectly even spacing for 50 strainer holes?
It seems impossible.
If you mess up the spacing by even a millimeter on one hole, the error compounds. And by the time you reach the other side of the skimmer, the whole pattern is a ruined, structurally weak mess.
Yeah, you'd have to scrap it.
Today, you would just program a CNC machine or a laser cutter to do it.
Yeah.
Doing this flawlessly by hand seems wild.
Well, if we look back at the measuring tools we discussed earlier, the answer is right there.
The calipers and dividers.
Exactly. The compasses, the spring dividers. They are essentially the 1980s analog equivalent of CNC programming software.
Wait, really? The math does the heavy lifting.
It does. Analog metalworking is largely a mental and geometric exercise that happens entirely in your head and on the surface of the metal before a single physical cut is made.
Okay, walk me through that.
The artisan locks their dividers at a specific width, right?
Yeah.
And they use them to step off perfectly equal distances around the circumference of the circle. They aren't guessing at all.
Oh, wow.
They are effectively drawing a flawless, mathematically sound geographic map directly onto the steel.
So the physical violence of punching the holes through the iron, that's actually the easy part.
Relatively speaking, yes. The physical punch is just the execution of the math. If your geometry is perfect, your skimmer will be perfect. The muscle is just following the map.
That is deeply satisfying. The brain builds the track and the hands just drive the train.
Exactly.
And the skimmer project also brings in the final critical element of the craft, assembling multiple pieces.
Yes, the joining.
Specifically, soldering the long handle to the perforated strainer bowl.
Soldering is the crucial thermal element here, and the text actually introduces it in earlier projects, like making a 12-gauge wire ring and an 18-gauge chain, just to build up the students' confidence before they tackle the skimmer.
Because it's tricky, and the manual goes into fascinating detail about this. You heat up a solid copper bit, which basically acts as an analog, fire-heated soldering iron.
Right.
But you don't just melt metal onto metal. It is this intense chemical process. You first have to rub the heated copper bit against a block of sal ammoniac.
And sal ammoniac is basically ammonium chloride. The artisan is using it to aggressively clean and tin the copper bit, ensuring the heat transfer from the tool to the workpiece is absolutely perfect.
Because any dirt would mess it up.
Any soot or barrier on that copper will completely ruin the joint.
Okay, so then you apply a chemical called flux to the metal seams you want to join, and only then do you melt the actual solder into the joint. But why do we need the flux?
Good question.
If the metal is hot and the solder is melted, why won't they just stick together?
This is where metallurgy meets chemistry. When you heat iron or steel up to soldering temperatures, the metal instantly reacts with the oxygen in the surrounding air.
Oh, I see.
It forms this microscopic oxide layer across the surface. Think of it like a rapid, invisible layer of rust.
So it's protecting itself, kind of.
Yeah, and melted solder physically cannot stick to that oxide layer. It will just bead up and roll right off.
Like water off a duck's back.
Precisely. So the flux acts as a chemical shield. As the joint gets hot, the flux chemically burns away the oxygen and eats through that invisible rust, keeping the raw metal completely exposed and clean.
That's amazing.
Because the oxygen is blocked, the molten solder can actually flow into the seam, share electrons with the base metal, and fuse.
So it's bonding on a molecular level.
Yes. You aren't just gluing two pieces of metal together with a softer metal. The chemistry of the flux allows you to create a permanent, unified, watertight joint.
Which you absolutely need if you're making a tool designed to carry heavy, hot food out of a vat of boiling oil.
Absolutely.
If that handle snaps because of a bad solder joint, someone is going to the hospital. It's just amazing to think about the cascading level of focus required for every single step here.
It demands absolute, unwavering presence from the artisan. You cannot drift off while doing this work.
You really can't. So, Bringing this all together, we started this journey by rolling up our sleeves, stripping off our watches, and neutralizing the workshop to respect the unforgiving nature of iron.
Step 1.
We explored how seemingly basic tools, like specialized files, aren't just for making things smooth. They are surgical instruments used to eliminate microscopic stress risers so objects don't destroy themselves under pressure.
Engineering through abrasion.
Right. We saw how folding an edge or swedging a curve alters the actual physics of a flat sheet, engineering massive structural strength out of thin air.
Origami into architecture.
And finally, we used pure geometry to map out a frying skimmer, permanently fusing it together by chemically blocking oxygen with flux.
It really is a profound reminder of human ingenuity.
It truly is. The seemingly simple, mundane items sitting in your kitchen drawer or your garage right now, they aren't just objects that magically popped out of a black box.
Not at all.
They are the final, tangible products of intense geometric planning, chemical understanding, and brute force metallurgical manipulation.
And that actually leads to something I'd love for you to consider long after we finish talking today.
Oh, what's that?
I challenge you. Pick up a manufactured metal object near you right now. It could be literally anything. A paperclip on your desk, the kitchen whisk in your drawer, or even the brass hinge on your door.
Just hold it in your hand and really feel its weight.
Exactly. Hold it and look closely at its inside curves, its folded edges, and its joined seams. Try to reverse engineer its creation in your mind.
It's a great exercise.
Think about it. What invisible lines of force did an engineer have to calculate so it wouldn't snap in your hand? What series of geometric maps, microscopic abrasions, and phantom hammers does that simple shape represent?
It makes you wonder.
It really does. It makes you wonder, what other hidden analog crafts are we taking completely for granted in our highly automated world?
A brilliant question to leave off on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep looking closer at the world around you.